I don't like to take much time. I know we are having brainstorm since early morning. Some psychologists say that a person may have maximum 3 hours tolerance to listen, but we are listening since 8 hours. I do understand how torturous it is for the participant. So, honorable MPs, CA members, international delegates, scholars, legal dignitaries, media friends, diplomats, and all who are you here in this hall, I welcome once again. And now I'll not take much time. I'll just pass on my mic to Dr. Host to give your report.
It's an honor and a difficult task to wrap up a day of discussion on such diverse topics as we had been doing it in the other room. And I will try to bring up some of the main issues, what I grasped, what are the topics which are under discussion and which may need some further deliberation. The morning session actually started with a continuation of the discussion we had here in the plenary. And we had the opportunity to have Professor Sanders to give us more insight into the different system, the parliamentary, presidential, and the mixed system of government, and also with some examples. And I think her main point was to look at the systems in the question of effectiveness, accountability, and inclusiveness. And also how these elements would be, let's say, addressed by the different systems cannot be attributed only to the system, but to the particular design of the system. So, although it seems from an academic point, if I can say this, and maybe also from practice in some countries, the parliamentary system is easier to accommodate elements of these three criteria. It is not impossible to have it also included in the other systems of the presidential or the, not really the mixed system. I think, if I remember right, and I have made a note somewhere, it seems to be the most difficult of all. You take the difficulties from both systems in one, and you may not end up with something very easy. We had later a discussion on the further topics of coming. I'd have just to see once more. We had so many notes. Of designing the legislative body and representation and accountability issues by Professor Teo-Lin Am. And she brought in the experiences of Singapore. And very much I grasped it is a rather the system which is based on consensus and on stability and uniformity. If we have over 60 years the same government and 82 of the members of an 84 member parliament are from one party, it's very, very consensus oriented, and it has from its start, as she explained, been very carefully designed to bring the multiracial and multi-religious society together and avoid drifting apart and create for all of them a place which they could, let's say, feel at home like. So on the issue of constitutional bodies, and Mr. Tilaram Shakya, he was relating that the present proposal is to create 13 or more constitutional bodies in Nepal, And he made a calculation that if you have these constitutional bodies at central level and at 10 regional levels and multiply all what is implied with it, he comes to more than 1,000 people who would be involved in all these kind of commissions. And I wonder whether this can be a contribution to effectiveness. I just said the 13 plus constitutional bodies at central and maybe regional level will engage or employ more than 1,000 people, and we have to see whether this really can lead to some efficient and effective kind of dealing with the topics which have been mentioned. Now, he made a very interesting final remark, and that would we have at the end a Singadorba in each region? And he left open what would be the size of the regional Singadorbas. Coming to the afternoon session, it was a very interesting debate, which we started on a very abstract level and got from Professor Stephen Greer, quite deep insight in the question of international laws, human rights, rule of law, and particularly how the European Convention on Human Rights has been a kind of guiding document for many countries, binding documents for the European countries, but also, let's say, guiding document for many other countries. And maybe this also could be something which could be looked at it in the process of constitution making. The constitutional review system was presented in a very concise form by Professor Ji Zheng. And I think the points she made, that there are different ways of how to bring in reviews and organize constitutional reviews, have been rather enlightening. And she made a comment that if the constitutional review is not in one specific institution, it could be a kind of lame duck kind of arrangement where things are not very clear. The further discussions on of Professor Purushottam Kulkarni on India, I think what struck me most was the question of how to deal with special provisions for what he called the backward classes, what in other circles sometimes is called this positive discrimination. And apparently in India it was a temporary provision which now has become a very hot political issue, and there seems to be no way to get away with this temporary provision and to come from, let's say, an ethnic discrimination or positive discrimination and support to a more rational support of economically and socially excluded groups, which are not necessarily always backward classes. And this issue may also be considered very and quite in some depth, as there is so much cultural similarity with India in this respect. We had then a long discussion on constitutional review. Where should it be located? How should it be implemented? And there were quite a number of very controversial statements, which I cannot all repeat, but I think the paper, the concept note which was prepared was considered as a discussion paper which is not yet finalized. And what Ji Zheng was saying, that the full interpretation of constitutional issues requires an independent institution, otherwise it may be a lame duck. then led to the question what kind of independent institutions this could be. And one of the commentators mentioned and asked the question, could it be a constitutional court? To finalize during the comments, I think two comments have been very striking for me. One by Mr. Badri Bahadur Karki, who said the discussion we had in this session this afternoon shows how far we are divided and how maybe difficult it is to come together. And he mentioned that the Constitution should be a document of consensus, but if we come not closer in our discussions, the fear could be that it may be a document of hate and division. And let's hope this will not take place. And lastly, the question on social justice, which Professor Purushottam Kulkarni raised, I think an important message which I grasped was that social justice for some groups should not be at the cost of other groups. And with this, I think I would wrap up my observations on the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Wrap-up note. Now I would like to request Dr. Singh Khara to present the wrap-up note.
Mr. Chairman, distinguished guests from outside and honorable members of the Constituent Assembly, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to sincerely express my appreciation to the organizers for associating me with this tremendous exercise as we stand at this rather significant threshold of history of this country. I have been involved in another part of this process, which everybody keeps saying is perhaps one of the most important determinants of the constitution-making process here. That is called the supervision, monitoring, and integration and rehabilitation of the Maoist army combatants, which is an integral part of the peace process and the interim constitution. I wanted to observe closely the dynamics, or in fact, whether I should say rigidities therein, in the other dimension of this very important exercise. And of course, the excellent plenary this morning and the two groups of discussion in which I have been present. Wrap up of the day. This title reminds me of a philosopher. I don't know how many of you have heard his name, called Carlos Fuentes. Talking about the extraordinary times of the late 20th century and early 21st century, which is called the information and communication age. Luminaries of constitutionalism and constitutional making process from all over the world to this country. Talking about these times, Carlos Fuentes says, the biggest challenge of our era is to translate available information into usable knowledge. Again, poses me that challenge. how will I process that information so that it becomes a usable knowledge in the exercise that we are involved in. In that process, I will not even, as a political scientist rather than a jurist or a lawyer, I will not even attempt to try and summarize the wonderful discussions that have taken place since this morning, and of course, the wisdom that we heard last night. What I thought I would do, and in that sense I have been very ably assured by another friend that he will try and go into the more detailed side of the discussion that took place. But what I thought I would do is, in order to meet that challenge of translating that information into usable knowledge, based on our discussion today and the program tomorrow, I thought there are a few things that we ought to have in mind when we undertake an exercise of this nature. Nationally, I think it was rightly pointed out by Professor Viktor Osiatensky, I hope I spelled it right, Professor, that in fact there are simultaneous processes going on. And in that sense, I absolutely agree with him, in the sense that it's not only, he mentioned two, but in fact we're going through three simultaneous processes together. One is the starting point of all of this is the peace process and the peace building process, which came up for discussion this morning. That happened within a background. Then it took a tremendous momentum after the 12-point understanding, and then subsequently the highly successful people's movement, which Nepal demonstrated an example of people's power, and then the various agreements that came through there, and of course subsequently the Constituent Assembly election, and of course the developments since then to this point, and of course the pain that we are passing through. Then of course there is the state and nation building process and the constitution making. The constitution making process is very intricately interlinked with these two other processes. Now, this internal processes are very much influenced by three, what I would call conceptual notions that are of global nature. One is the evolving and changing dynamics and nature of what all of us talk about, the notion of sovereignty and what we understand. If you look around the world, that very nature of either what I have written and talked about, what I call an evolving and a devolving system together. The second is what I call the globalization of economics, but increasing localization of politics. And this is not a new thing, in the sense that this has been debated by scholars since the 1920s as to how there are these simultaneously contradictory dichotomies that influence human endeavor. And those concepts very much affect the exercise that we are engaged in. And third, I would say, can you ever talk about any human endeavor devoid of the consequences of time and space? And the space we are in, the geopolitics, is critical. So our discourse, and of course subsequently the Constitution, will be influenced by these three national and three conceptual global issues. I have been struck by the level of wisdom that was expressed during our discussions this morning. Of course, as I said, I will leave most of the actual sides of the discussion to my friend. And of course, since the organizers have also kindly put me for similar kind of, shall I say, pleasure or pain, tomorrow, I propose that I will try to sort of organize my thoughts in relation to the discussion that we have today as well as tomorrow, and how that relates to the exercise within the Constituent Assembly, and of course the broader process of constitution making, in which all Nepalese, in fact, I was yesterday in the opening, one gentleman asked me, when I was introduced that he's a former diplomat, he said, how are you involved in the constitution making process? For your information, and of course, that very gentleman today made it very clear that in fact the constitution is as importantly being made inside the halls of the Constituent Assembly as outside, in the sense that all Nepalese are waiting for it. So in that sense, I will beg your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, to conclude with these thoughts and then perhaps pass it on to somebody else. Thank you.
Now I would like to request Rudra Sarma, if you have to add something in the note of Dr. Simkhada, but you have given only 5 minutes because time is running out.
First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Let me start. Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me summarize the whole thing we did this morning and afternoon in one sentence. The one single sentence I concluded the whole discussion is, democracy is not a matter to be exported or imported, nor the peace-building process, the constitution-making process is a tree for which, as Professor Osetesky yesterday told, that we can import a lot of branches from several countries and put together to make a single tree. That was a conclusion in one sentence, what we did for the whole this evening and this afternoon. However, we have privilege to look into the experiences and practice for the last 2 years, different theories and practices in different parts of the world, before we finally make our constitution. That's why we did in this afternoon and this morning. And we had several sessions. And the session, and the first preliminary session, Professor Honorable Bob Ray talked about the forms of government. He talked about the parliamentary system of government and Westminster system of government. And he pointed out the risks of deadlock in the presidential system. And he also talked about how the Westminster system was evolved. And finally, he identified the French model as a working ideal. And he was of the opinion that Nepali people deserve to make a government that belongs to themselves. And we had two interesting papers on the form of government. We had two professors who juxtaposed each other. We could see a paradox of their own experiences. We had one professor who worked in his own country, maybe 60 years or something like that, in the presidential system, and he was vehemently opposing the presidential system. And we had And another side, we had our own Nepali professor who works in United Kingdom, London, teaches constitution law in United Kingdom for several years, and he was very much against the prime minister system or Westminster system. So this was the juxtaposition of their experiences, a paradox of their experiences we saw in this morning. And against, speaking against Mr. Then we had another session on structuring the state and federal framework. In that session, we saw how we heard and shared our experience too in the experience of Ethiopia, and Mr. George Anderson talked about the federal system and its perspective with respect to Nepal. And we had another eminent views on the federal system, that in the perspective that we have now constitutional liability to turn the Nepal into federal state, but we are learning several experiences about 25 countries all over the world. We are already in federal system, but still at the same time we know that there are some countries in the world which adopted federal system and they came back to unitary system again. So this is the position we have to identify today before we talk about anything about federal system. The Ethiopian right to self-determination, as we heard, includes the right of the group. The right of the group, as we heard, that the right of the group automatically incorporates the right of the group to make their own home, and that's why it goes to the secession. So we need to consider what its relevance in our constitution-making process in terms of federalism. And we also heard about the evolution of Nepal's peace process, its oversight, its sequencing, and shortcomings in the peacemaking process. There are some other comments that the federalism, then we have to go for referendum before which we choose to put the word federalism in the constitution. But now it's too late to go to the referendum. But still, we need to be very clever enough to adopt the suitable form of federalism in Nepal. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Mr. Sarma. And now I request Dr. Marcus.
To our host this evening, and I still have the opportunity for the wrap-up tomorrow.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Marcus. And I'm stopped by Dr. Surya that the time is running out, even though we have to honor to the honorable guest of the floor. Now I open the floor for some queries if you have. But I'll ask 5 questions or queries any of you have. And is there anyone? Yes, please. Yeah. So is there anyone from international delegates?
Okay. Hello. Thank you. In the context of Nepal, now latest phenomena of the political in the country.
So could you identify yourself?
I am Mr. Sabisuba. I am from Limbuan. I am fighting to establish Limbuan autonomy in the eastern part of the Nepal. I would like to request all the organizer and all
Just bullet questions. Bullet questions.
Bullet question is going ahead. Going ahead. The whole phenomena of the Nepalese people and some exportees, they are not intending to start this full phase of federalism in the country. Some of the Brahmins group who are called enlightened, they want to intend to start with federalism, multi-unilateral federalism. I think this is not appropriate federalism. We want full phase of federalism where there should be ensured political right and all kind of rights of the Nepali people as well all oppressed people of Nepal.
Thank you, Mr. Subba. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Subba.
Okay, thank
Yes, please. You.
Same session as the one in which presidential system and other system of government was discussed. Somebody talked about the deadlock in the presidential system. How can we illustrate it? What was it? What was the deadlock? Or what would be the deadlock if there is presidential system? Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a chair, I would like to pass on some remarks of the deliberations the whole day. Yesterday, Professor actually touched my mind. The European, the concern about the content rather than the process and participatory process. The Deng Xiaoping had told once whether the cat is a black or white, it is good till it catches the mice. So, but we, third world, we are not concerned only content, we also concerned about the process and participation also. So we must thank to our political parties and leaders. In the history of the whole world, in my little experience, information, our Constitutional Assembly is an example of inclusiveness as well as participatory process. But we lawyers now are very much concerned about the content of the Constitution, whether the Constitutional Assembly can produce the content. This is a doubt in the mind of the people. So I think international experts and Nepali experts now, this is our task, this is our duty to help the Constitutional Assembly for the content of the Constitution. So time is very limited. Almost we have 3.5 months. Within 3.5 months, we have to provide a good constitution to the people. So with the help of the Canadian Bar Association, a joint project we had, we studied about the challenges. It took about 2 years for us to visit the whole part of Nepal and discuss with the civil society. We found 99 challenges the CA has to face to prepare a good constitution. But the form of government and the restructuring of the state, federal framework, the political parties have, or the leaders have taken it as a prestige and as their political philosophy. But in my mind, these are not the ends. Form of government and the federal structure, not the end. This is the means to achieve the end. Even in the capitalist systems, they have presidential system, they have parliamentary systems, even they have federal systems, they have unitary system. bone contentions which is in the parliament is not a political philosophical ground. And if they come up with this, their mindset, if they could be accountable to the people and the nation above from their political manifesto, because most of the political parties are stick on their manifesto in the parliament. If they stick on their manifesto, not possible to have the understanding or mutual understanding. So if this August gathering, Legal Liberties International distinguished scholars could provide a very effective, practical, functional proposals to the Constitutional Assembly, this will be the greatest contribution in the history of the constitutional development of Nepal. Actually, we need what content should be in the constitutions which will provide justices for all included communities in the past decades. So, with these few words, I would like to thank once again to the organizer organizing such a very important conference of internationally very known, renowned constitutional experts, and inviting them to contribute to our new constitutions. And I also thank all of you coming such a long way to help Nepal, to rescue Nepal